What's up everybody, Ryco here. Today, we're going to be going over the best side deck options for the Legacy of Destruction format. With the wide variety of decks that are currently playable right now, there's definitely a lot of choices to consider. However, there are definitely certain decks that we want to prepare for more than others, as they can definitely be frightening if you're not prepared for them. Think Snake Eye, or Tenpai, or Voiceless Voice. However, because there's such a wide variety, we definitely want to make sure that the cards we're siding in hit all of the decks. If not all the decks, then as many as possible. Although the cards are shown on the screen, be sure to stick around to hear the reasoning for each card, as not all cards work in all decks. There are certain cards that thrive only in specific decks and hit specific matchups. So with that, let's just jump right in. Starting off, we've got the Bystials. Now, I'm sure as you all know by now, the Bystials are pretty broken cards. However, specifically with this format, they're especially good. Being able to get a body and get a search with Magnamut for specifically, and clear out a light or dark from the grave, can definitely sway the tide of a game in your favor. Now, you're definitely not going to be putting this in versus all decks, and not all decks can play this. For example, if you're playing Flunderese, you're obviously not going to play Magnamut. But if, for example, you're playing Tenpai, playing the Bystials can be a fantastic choice. Also, Bystials, if you're playing them in decks that have monsters that are level 4 and they're light monsters, having access to Chaos Angel can definitely be strong and powerful. Also, Druis Worm, being able to send a card, making it to where it's harder for you to die, for example, versus Tenpai, it can be good, but if you're looking at something like Tenpai, they're all fire, so Bystials may not be the best versus them. Where Bystials seem to shine the most is versus Voiceless Voice. Voiceless Voice, if they don't play around it, Bystials can definitely be very powerful. Bystials are also very good versus a lot of different rogue decks, whether it be something like Tear Laments, or it be something like Phantom Knights, or anything with light and dark monsters really. Overall, Bystials are definitely a solid choice, but if you're kind of back and forth as to whether or not your deck can really utilize them to their fullest potential, maybe it's not the best. It's up to you and your discretion based on which deck you're playing. The next card I want to go over is Spooky Dogwood. This card, especially in Legacy of Destruction, gets much, much better. With the introduction of Tenpai, being able to drop a Dogwood essentially means that you're going to be living that turn. It doesn't matter how much damage they can put up. If you're gaining a bunch of life points every single time they special summon a monster, it's not really going to matter and you will buy another turn. This is also good, yes, for time rules, but it specifically shines for decks that have a bit of a grind game to them and a longer strategy. So something, if you're playing Tenpai, for example, you may not want to play Dogwood as you're pretty much ending your matches under the time limit. But if you're playing something like Pearly, for example, or let's say you really want to be like Joshua Schmidt and play Paleos, this is a really, really good card because you will be going into time a lot. And so in time, this is one of the best hand traps you can have. It's essentially a pseudo maxi. Going on to the next card, we've got Cosmic Cyclone. Now this card shines this format. Every single deck can be hit by Cyclone in some capacity, whether it be Tenpai hitting the field spell, Snake Eye hitting the IP in the back row or their field spell. You can hit Voiceless Voice hitting any of their continuous spells or traps. You can also hit a deck like Melodious, which there is a profile on my channel if you haven't seen it yet. Be sure to go check it out. But Cyclone can hurt Melodious too, as getting rid of the scales can be pretty detrimental, especially if you side this in going first and hit the level 5 scale. That can be very good. It's the same thing with Bystials actually. Bystials are pretty good against Melodious too. It won't stop them in their tracks, but it'll definitely hurt. But continuing with Cyclone, there are just so many decks that essentially fold to Cyclone, and there's so many decks that rely on continuous spells, field spells, continuous traps. Cyclone can definitely come in clutch. And also, because a lot of people seem to be enjoying stun decks right now, having Cyclone somewhere can definitely be beneficial. As you noticed, there's not Lightning Storm or Duster in here, and although those are very, very powerful cards, I just personally don't think they're strong enough this format to justify side decking them. If you're a specific deck that needs a big blowout card, maybe you can consider siding Lightning Storm and Duster, but as of now, for this current format, the sheer flexibility with Cosmic Cyclone and the fact that you can side it in going first and second puts it a step above Lightning Storm and Duster. Going on to the next card, we've got Forbidden Droplet. Now, Forbidden Droplet's an interesting one. If you're playing against a shifter deck, obviously this isn't going to be that good because, well, you can't send cards from your hand or the field to the grave. But if you're playing against a deck like, for example, Melodious or Voiceless Voice, or arguably even the fire decks, being able to just use Droplet to deal with a problematic monster or stop a Towers monster, for example, from just dominating the game, it's very, very good. Also, against, for example, fire, being able to hit an Appaloosa can absolutely make or break the difference. But something that is kind of not that good with Droplet is the fact that you have to pitch a lot of resources for it. So this card definitely shines in 1-card combo decks. If you're a deck that plays 2 to 3 card combos, you may not want to run this and you may want to stick to something like Dark Ruler instead. But Dark Ruler definitely isn't that strong this format because, for example, if you go against something like Branded, if you're not siding Bystials versus Branded, which Bystials are good versus Branded because they stop the puppet lock, having Droplet is really, really powerful because that can stop them from puppet locking you, whereas something like Dark Ruler cannot. Same thing goes for any deck that spits out Calamity. Having Droplet to stop the Calamity lock can be very, very powerful, but something like Dark Ruler can't stop that. So definitely something to consider when looking at this card. For the next one, we've got Evenly Matched. Now that Barone and Savage are banned, decks are less likely to put up Omni Negates. And so with that, a card like Evenly Matched can definitely shine a lot more. Now, this card's definitely not that good against specific decks. For example, if you're going to make Tenpai go first, you're not going to put in Evenly Matched. You may not even put it in against Voiceless Voice, for example, because they have that Omni Negate. But if you're going against a deck like Yugioh, that could be very, very powerful because they don't put up any Omni Negates and they commit a lot of cards to the field. So Evenly Matched can definitely be powerful there. It's also pretty good versus Snake Eyes now because of the fact that they don't have Omni Negates anymore. They only have Monster Negates, and Evenly Matched essentially deals with that. Overall, Evenly Matched can be a solid card, but not all decks really want to commit a battle phase for this. For example, if you're playing Tenpai, you don't want to lose your battle phase over a card like Evenly Matched, so playing this board breaker definitely isn't that strong. But other decks can definitely utilize this. For example, if you're playing Melodious and you just need to clear a big board so you can set up your board, having something like Evenly Matched into either a fire deck or a Yubel deck or something that commits to the field can definitely be strong. Next, moving on, we've got Thrust. Now, I think Thrust is definitely well positioned this format because a lot of people are running hand traps, and even if they're not running hand traps, a lot of interaction comes through monster effects. If your opponent goes first and you're going second, you have Thrust, and your opponent will activate a monster effect and you can essentially search anything or set anything. But going first, you essentially would want to only put this in versus the big hand trap decks. And then some of the best search targets are Talents. Obviously, Talents is a very, very powerful card. It's 3 banned cards. Very, very good, very flexible. It can deal with a lot of issues going first and second. There's the 2 take cards, Change of Heart and Mind Control. These are searchable off Thrust, and these are very powerful as well with Omni Negates being gone. Taking something like an Appaloosa can definitely sway the tide of the game in your favor. And then another Thrust target that I think is very, very good is Herald of the Abyss. This deals with essentially Towers monsters, and also with Delicious coming back to 2 in the most recent ban list, there will be at least 1 to 2 Pearly players if you go to a regional or a big event. People really like Pearly, and if you're not prepared for that deck, it will easily beat you. Overall, Herald of the Abyss, I think if you're siding Thrust, you definitely want to include at least 1 copy because you want to be prepared for Towers matchups and the Pearly matchup. Then we got one of the best cards this format, Dimensional Barrier. Why is this card so good, you say? Well, it's essentially good into everything except fire. So you obviously wouldn't side this in versus fire, but if you're going against Tenpai, you put this in, call Synchro. Very powerful. It essentially means you'll survive. And then you can also call Fusion versus Branded, Fusion versus Melodious. You can call plenty of things, really. You could call Ritual versus Voiceless Voice. Just this card is very, very flexible. It's a very broken, lingering Floodgate effect. And the fact that it's settable off Thrust as well means you'll be seeing this quite often, especially if your opponent's hand trapping you. So overall, if you have space in your side deck, I highly recommend playing D-Barrier at least at 1 copy. Another great card this format that not a lot of people are playing, but it's fantastic to set off Thrust, is the Black Goat Laughs. The Black Goat Laughs is a very unique card in that it's great going first and it can be great going second. The fact that it has a good graveyard effect and a good effect if you draw the card means a deck like, for example, Tear Laments, or if you're playing Pearly and you're discarding cards and you're putting the cards into the graveyard, this card can definitely shine. Or if you're playing a deck like Lightsworn, for example, this card is good to draw, it's good to mill, it's solid interruption going first, and if you're going second and you put it in the grave, you can declare a monster effect and that essentially stops something. So if this hits the graveyard and you're playing against fire, you can banish it, call IP Masquerena, and although they can summon out the IP Masquerena, they won't be able to use its effect. You could do the same thing where if this hits the grave and you're playing against Pearly, you can call Noir, and now they can't activate the effect of Noir. They'll have to chain to it and use the effect there if they want to. But overall, this is a very, very solid card. A lot of flexibility, very strong. It's also good against Tenpai. You call Chandra, and it definitely hurts a lot of their combos. They have to draw really well to be able to play through that. Overall, I do recommend this. A very niche card that you could be playing to set off Thrust is Threatening Roar. Now, this is essentially just for Tenpai. If you are at a locals and everyone's playing Tenpai, or if you're going to regionals or a YCS and you expect a lot of Tenpai, it could be good to play a Thrust package with D-Barrier, Threatening Roar, and Black Goat Laughs. Threatening Roar specifically kills, and absolutely kills Tenpai. The whole purpose around Tenpai, I'm sure all of you know by now, is to just go to the battle phase and do everything in the battle phase while declaring attacks, and you get a bunch of effects based on like the number of attacks you declare. So being able to just say, no, you can't declare an attack this turn, and the fact that it essentially buys you another turn could make or break the difference between winning or losing. Another really good card that's settable off Thrust is Harpy's Featherstorm. And yes, I know this card is very, very specific and very niche, and normally only Flu can run it, but with the introduction of Tenpai, if you're playing a fire deck and you're playing Snake Eye cards, you can easily make Fucho. Fucho means you'll survive because this card essentially can't be killed by Tenpai. It's unaffected by other card effects, and you can detach two to make it to where it can't be destroyed by battle, and you take no battle damage involving the card. So Fucho being able to buy you a turn is very, very powerful. But what's interesting with Fucho is it's a wind-winged beast. So you can activate Featherstorm if you control Fucho. So you can go normal Snake Eyes Ash, add Poplar, special Poplar, search, make Fucho, and if you drew Featherstorm, you have a turn skip. If they hand trap you at all, you can Thrust, set Featherstorm. Very, very strong, very powerful. Another card I wanted to talk about that not too many people are looking at right now is actually Mistaken Arrest. If you look at most of the decks in the meta right now, most everything searches. And so being able to build a board of your own and then pass turn and then flip this on your opponent's turn, it's a very powerful lingering floodgate, and most decks don't really have counterplay to this. You flip this versus Tenpai, you're in a great spot. You flip this versus Snake Eye, you're in a great spot. You flip this versus Melodious versus Voiceless Voice versus Yubel versus really anything that searches, and this card is phenomenal. The only downside is the lingering effect lasts until the end of your next turn, so you have to be able to kill with your deck after flipping this without searching after you build a board. But if you're playing a deck to where that doesn't really matter, Mistaken Arrest is a phenomenal option, and I would highly recommend it for this format. Another great card, although it's at 1, is Anti-Spell. There's not really much to explain here. Anti-Spell is just a very powerful, oppressive floodgate that once you're done building a board, you flip this in your opponent's draw phase. If they don't have the Cyclone, a lot of decks will just essentially scoop to this. Whether it be Snake Eyes or Voiceless Voice or Tenpai or Melodious, Yubel, arguably even like Lightsworn if you're not seeing your monster engine. Runic, for example. Anti-Spell just shuts down so many decks. And so being able to have Anti-Spell to flip on your opponent's turn, and if you can remove this and just kill on turn 3, this could be one of the best cards to side in going first. Another pair of cards I wanted to talk about is Simul Archfiends and Archfiend Harris. So Simul Archfiends is essentially like a pseudo D-Barrier, but it also affects Link monsters. And yes, this first sentence does confuse people. It says this turn, neither player can special summon monsters with the same types, Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Exe, or Link they already control. They already control, meaning they don't have to control it when you activate this. You can just shotgun this in the standby phase or the draw phase, or if they Duster after you can just chain this. And then that way, if, for example, you activate this in the draw phase, later that turn, if they summon an XYZ, they can't summon any more XYZs. If they summon a link, they can't summon any more links, and so on and so forth. So this card is very, very powerful. And this pairs with Eris is because when she is sent to the graveyard by card effect or by destroy by battle, but it's mainly going to come up by card effect, you can actually search the symbol. This can come up if you're playing a deck like Pearly and you pitch Eris, you can then search the symbol, or if you're playing Tear Lament and you mill this, or you're playing Lightsworn and you mill this. It is specifically by card effect, but if you mill it by card effect, you can search the symbol. So having a searchable D barrier that's not just from Thrust is very, very powerful as well. But yes, you could set this off Thrust as well. And then another very powerful card I wanted to talk about is Power Sink Stone. This card is unique in that it's essentially like a pseudo Mystic Mine, but let me explain. So each time a monster effect is activated, you place a Spellstone counter on this card, maximum 2. When it has 2 Spellstone counters, neither player can activate the effects of face-up monsters on the field. Also, the effects of face-up monsters on the field are negated. And then during the end phase, you clear the counters off the card. So this card specifically is really, really good in Melodious. The reason why is with Melodious, after you build a board and you set this, you pass turn, you can just flip this. You'll trigger the first counter with Magnificat, and Magnificat is the bounce. It's that new fusion monster that can non-targeting return face-up cards. So you can go Power Sink Stone, use the bounce face-up cards. After you bounce everything, you gain a counter on Power Sink Stone, and then the next time your opponent activates a monster effect, you get a second counter on this. So everything that your opponent does essentially after you put one counter on it and then they put the second one on it, it's essentially skill drain and Mystic Mine. They can't activate the effects, and then the effect that they activated on the field is negated. It's a very, very powerful card, but it's very, very niche, and it's specifically only good in Melodious, really. There are other decks that can utilize this, but with Melodious in particular, this is definitely a powerful option. Now, a lot of these, although some are the hand traps, a lot of these were board breakers. If you're going for the hand trap approach, it could be good to just side more hand traps. So if you're playing a bunch of hand traps in your deck, like let's say you're playing Melodious and you're playing 17 hand traps, a lot of your main ones are going to be Ash, Imperm, Ogre, Veiler, Droll, Nib, but if you're looking to side deck, or if you can't fit all of these in your deck, you can definitely side deck other options depending on what your matchups are. If you feel you lose to decks that lose to Nib, side Nib. If you feel like you're going to be playing against a lot of Voiceless or Labyrinth, for example, side Bell. If you're a deck that can play Shifter, but you don't really want to main deck it, for example, like Tenpai, siding Shifter can be a solid option, obviously, because it's a broken card, but it's a solid option versus a lot of decks. You can also side in 1 Shifter and 3 cross out if you hard lose to Shifter. For example, if you're playing something like Tear Laments, to where you just fold to Shifter, you can just play 3 crossout Designator and a Shifter because realistically there's no other counterplay to Shifter. And then also another good pair of hand traps you can try playing are Gamma and Delta. These cards are very, very powerful, not only because they negate, but they destroy as well. And Gamma, being a monster negate and destroy, comes up quite often. It's very, very powerful, very, very strong. It is at 1, so the way to fix the ratio with that is to play Delta. Some people have been picking up Beta, the Psyframe Beta, which is the negate attack. So it's when your opponent attacks, you can special summon this in a driver, destroy the attacking monster, then end the battle phase. Some people are picking this up for Tenpai. However, a lot of Tenpai players are summoning the level 10 Synchro before they go to the battle phase. And when that level 10 Synchro is on the field, you can't activate anything in the battle phase. So Beta definitely isn't good, and if they summon that, it's just a dead card in your hand. Overall, I wouldn't recommend playing Beta. Another card I wanted to talk about actually was Herald of Orange Light. Obviously, Melodious is going to be playing this because it's essentially Gamma, but you have to pitch a fairy. But you could also consider this in other decks if you play fairies, essentially. There aren't too many meta strategies other than Melodious right now, but if you're playing Melodious and you're considering what hand traps to play, definitely consider maxing out on Herald of Orange Light, as having a monster negate and destruction can come up quite often and can be very detrimental for a lot of decks. And then the last 2 cards I wanted to talk about are Gaga Cowboy and Abyss Dweller. So Gaga Cowboy, kind of similar to Dogwood. You just kind of want something for time. If you're a rank 4 deck, this could be something good to side in if you're playing, for example, Lightsworn. Having Gaga Cowboy can come up often if you're going to time a lot because you're playing a big combo deck and you just want something for time. And then Dweller. A lot of people don't really side extra deck monsters too often, but siding something like Dweller can be very powerful. If you're going against a deck like Fire or Tear Lament, or arguably even Tenpai, making a Dweller to stop the graveyard negates is very, very strong. And it's not good against all matchups, and extra decks definitely are tight nowadays. And so it could be good to side this in for going first. But yeah, that's the list. I'm curious to know, did I miss anything? Is there anything that I didn't talk about that really makes a big difference this format? Let me know in the comments below. But if you stuck around this far, thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and until next time, peace.